Hello,
Because
my name
understanding great
is
literature
Jesan
is
Sorrells,
better
and
than
this
trying to read
is
and
the
understand
Leadership
yet
Lessons
another
from the
business
Great
book.
Books
On the
podcast,
Leadership Lessons from the Great Books
episode number
podcast, we commit to reading,
165.
dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western
So
canon.
we are
You
wrapping
know,
up
those
our
books,
time
from Jane
with
Austen to
science
Shakespeare,
fiction books.
and everything else in
We
between
started off
that you might
our
have fallen
journey, and
asleep
it's been
trying
a
to
long
read in high
summer
school.
journey.
We do this for our
summer of
listeners,
2025.
the owner, the
But we
entrepreneur, the
began
manager, or the
with
civic leader who doesn't have the
Philip
time
K.
to
Dick's
read,
book,
dissect,
Do
analyze, and
Androids
leverage
Dream of Electric
insights
Sheep?
from
We
literature
wandered all the way
to
through Stranger
execute
in a
leadership
Strange
best
Land
practices
and The Martian
in the confusing
Chronicles.
and chaotic
And now we
postmodern
have
world
arrived at the
we all now
grandfather of them
inhabit.
all.
Welcome to
The
the
book that
rescuing
we
of Western
are
civilization
going to cover
at the
today
intersection
is
of
one of
literature and
those
leadership.
books that
Welcome
is
to the
so much a
Leadership
part of the
Lessons
general
from the
fabric
Great Books
of our
podcast.
lives when we think of, well, when we think of temporality, when we think of space, when we think of science fiction, that we tend to not remember that this book actually came from somewhere. It didn't just sort of show up as the background fabric, sui generis. The book we're covering today is one of those rare science fiction novels that has influenced actual science itself, and how we tend to think about various physics-based problems in a deeply physical world. Now, I'm about to say something here, and I want you to follow the bouncing ball. Dr. Emmett Brown's assertions to the contrary, according to physicists, a person cannot travel backwards in time to quote-unquote correct past mistakes, past injustices, or even past traumas. You also can't, at least at this point in human history, just head on down to the local corporate-owned drugstore and buy some plutonium. You still, even now, have to rip it off. The idea of returning to a time in the past that was better than today via technology and science, rather than via faulty memory or a pastiche of overwrought nostalgia and vague happy feelings, is a quirk unique to human beings. Part of that quirk has to do with conscious understanding of time, temporality, and of course, birth and death. Today, on this episode of the podcast, we will rescue from the obscure past and from when the deep magic of science fiction itself was originally laid, themes for leaders from a book that is buried deeply, whose themes are buried deeply, even whose dramatic arc is buried deeply in our collective Western scientific materialistic cultural memory. Today, we will be discussing The Time Machine. There we go. Got it on camera. By H.G. Wells. Leaders, after the show today, I do have a few other things going on, but I am headed out of town to appropriate some plutonium from some Ukrainian nationalists as payment in exchange for giving them a shoddy bomb casing full of used pinball machine parts. So I think that should work out really well. I don't think I'll have any problem putting that in my flux capacitor in my DeLorean brought to you by Tesla that's parked out back. And today, the person who's going to join me on my journey before I go on my other journey is a person who has been on our show before. Our co-host rejoining us for episode number 143, Christen B. Horne. How are you doing, Christen? How's it going today?
Doing well. Glad to be here. I'm very excited.
I'm
always excited to be here. I love this podcast so much.
Yeah. So yeah, I do need to make some preparations. Because time travel it's a testy thing. You know, you really, and you want to time travel in style. You don't want to go back in like an ugly machine or a box car or a rail car or
police box. I know, that's pretty stylish.
I don't know, that is pretty stylish. You do want to travel with some style, as Dr. Emmett Brown said, as he told Marty McFly once at the Pinewoods Mall at 3:00 in the morning on October 12th, or maybe it was October 15th, 1985. So we're going to open with just a couple of pages from The Time Machine, just to sort of set where we're going. And then we're going to ask Christen her thoughts on this book. on some of the themes for leaders and sort of lay the foundation for where we're going to be going today in our show. So, oh, by the way, we will be reading directly from the Time Machine. One of the great things about this book is that it was published originally published in, I believe it was 1895, and it is open source, which means it is in the public domain, which means we can read freely from it. Breathe free, the air. All right. So I'm going to pick up with the time traveler telling his story, his incredulous story, to some folks in 1890s London, and this is picking up from chapter 10, When Night Came, and I quote: "Looking at these stars suddenly dwarfed my own troubles and all the gravities of terrestrial life. I thought of their unfathomable distance and the slow, inevitable drift of their movements out of the unknown past into the unknown future. I thought of the great precessional cycle that the pole of the earth describes. Only 40 times had that silent revolution occurred during all the years that I had traversed. And during these few revolutions, all the activity, all the traditions, the complex organizations, the nations, languages, literatures, aspirations, even the mere memory of man as I knew him, had been swept out of existence. Instead were these frail creatures who had forgotten their high ancestry and the white things of which I went in terror. And then I thought of the great fear that was between the two species, and for the first time, with a sudden shiver, came the clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. Yet it was too horrible. I looked at little Weena sleeping beside me, her face white and star-like under the stars, and forthwith dismissed the thought. Through that long night, I held my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could and whiled away the time by trying to fancy I could find signs of old constellations in the new confusion. The sky kept very clear, except for hazy cloud or so. No doubt I dozed at times. Then, as my vigil wore on, came a faintness in the eastward sky, like the reflection of some colorless fire, and the old moon rose, thin and peaked and white. And close behind it, overtaking it and overflowing it, the dawn came, pale at first, and then growing pink and warm. No Morlocks had approached us. Indeed, I had seen none upon the hill that night. And in the confidence of renewed day, it almost seemed to me that my fear had been unreasonable. I stood up and found my foot with the loose heel swollen at the ankle and painful under the heel, so I sat down again, took off my shoes, and flung them away. I awakened Weena, and we went down to the wood. Now green and pleasant instead of black and forbidding, we found some fruit wherewith to break our fast. We soon met others of the dainty ones, laughing and dancing in the sunlight as though there was no such thing as in nature as the night. And then I thought once more of the meat I had seen. I felt assured now of what it was, and from the bottom of my heart, I pitied this last feeble rill from the great flood of humanity. Clearly, at some time in the long ago of human decay, the Morlocks' food had run short. Possibly they had lived on rats and such like vermin. Even now, man is far less discriminating and exclusive in his food than he was, far less than any monkey. His prejudice against human flesh is no deep-seated instinct. And so these inhuman sons of men, I tried to look at the thing in a scientific spirit. After all, they were less human and more remote than our cannibal ancestors of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and the intelligence that would have made this state of things a torment had gone. Why should I trouble myself? These Eloi were mere fatted cattle, which the ant-like Morlocks preserved and preyed upon, probably saw to the breeding of. And there was Weena, dancing at my side. I shouldn't laugh, but I chuckle because of where we're going to go today with this. But Christen, let's start off with Mr. Wells and the Time Machine. What do you know about this book, and what encouraged you to read it upon my sending you the list of books? Why did you pick this one as one that you wanted to talk about on our show today?
Honestly, because I wanted a reason to read it. It's one of those, like, kind of like what you were saying. It's one of the foundational science sci-fi books. And I knew very little about it. And I actually told my husband, I was like, "Hey, I'm reading The Time Machine to discuss with Jesan on his podcast." And he was like, "Oh yeah, H.G. Wells." And I was like, "Okay, so you know about that."
Exactly.
As much as I read sci-fi, this one just had completely escaped my notice and my readership. So I saw it not on the list, and I was like, well, obviously, we
Obviously.
need to read that. And what I didn't know is, I play Dungeons and Dragons, and there's a species in that game called the Morlocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw the Morlocks pop up and I was like, no way. That is like, so that's one of those things that I aspire to as a writer, is
Mm-hmm.
to write something that becomes so pervasive in the vernacular that it just becomes, this is just a thing now. So it just, yeah, it's really cool.
Well, and as a writer, when you're looking at H.G. Wells' writings, let's talk about the writing a little bit of the Time Machine. So H.G. Wells was a utopian socialist cultural writer and critic. He was an accomplished novelist. He wrote many novels, many stories that we still reference today. The Invisible Man among them, of course, The Time Machine, and a few others. He is credited with giving an intellectual pastiche to the genre of science fiction, which at the time, in the 1890s and in the early 20th century, was either considered to be kid stuff. We talked a little bit about this on the Martian Chronicles episode that we did when we looked at Ray Bradbury's work. And when we talked about Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, right? Where Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov are considered to be the deans of science fiction, the ones who raised it from being low stuff to being high stuff. But H.G. Wells was the grandfather of them all. Without Wells, they wouldn't have had, I think, a hope in hell, and Wells didn't believe in hell, so that's fine. But a hope in that place of raising the writing in such a genre to a particular level. So as a writer, what do you think of the writing of this in this novel?
Uh, I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. I think, and I'm sure he did not approach it that way. It's like, this is very serious. Um, and I can also definitely see how, from it sprang the rest of especially our time travel thought experiments that we like to consider and tell stories of. Um, but one of the first things I noticed is I'm writing in third person, and this switches, like, it goes from, I think, no, it's just in first person the entire time. And it's like, okay, I'm writing this down, and then this is verbatim what he said. And so that was really interesting because there's not a lot of first person published today. But I still found it very effective, not very jarring. And it was, yeah, it was a fun read.
Why do you think that is? Is that because we're all doing the first person narrative thing on social media with the cameras in our faces now, and the TikToks and the tweeting? Or and then, like, well, is it because our first person narratives have switched to mediums, and so books are no longer the place for that? Or is it because we've just
Question.
run out of, like, maybe those MFA programs and those writer retreats aren't actually training people to write? I don't know.
No, I mean, it probably is. I feel like a lot of people, the teacher that I was listening to when I started my book, he was fairly even-handed with the different perspectives and said, choose whichever one works best for your story. And I felt that first person was extremely effective for this particular story. But at the same time, he doesn't teach at university. And he tends to teach in a very unorthodox way. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if universities are like, third person, this is the one that sells. Write in third person. You can only write in third person past, actually. And the reason I say mostly objective is because this particular teacher really hated on third person present, which is what I'm writing in. So he
What?
hates third person present. He's
Yeah,
like,
it's
it
everyone's
only
rather.
works in YA. And I'm like, okay, dude.
Well, and
See you
that's
later.
well, and that's I think because I don't know why you said this is what sells. And I think at a literary level, you're correct. Like, that's what the agents can push, and that's what the
Yeah.
publishers can sort of package and market and scale. and guarantee, or at least make the assumption of a guarantee that you're going to sell 10,000 copies to Barnes and Noble somewhere, which is all you need, by the way, kids, to be on the New York Times bestseller list. 10,000 copies. That's it. And that sounds like a huge number when you sold 0, but you realize after you've written and published a few books that actually is not that big a number. And so it's kind of interesting to see who winds up on the New York Times bestseller list. Anyway, as you already mentioned, as Christen already mentioned, the work is generally credited, the Time Machine is generally credited with the popularization of the concept of time travel. And Wells did coin that term, time machine, which is almost
crazy to me.
Universally. I know. Yeah, which again, it doesn't surprise me. So in thinking about the literary life of H.G. Wells, right? The time in which he wrote. So he was writing during the second generation after Darwin. So Darwin's, theory of evolution was published, gosh, I believe it was in the 1840s or 1850s, The Origin of the Species. We can check on that on the interwebs. Christian's going to go ahead and look that up. But I believe that Origin of the Species was the 30s or the 40s. And so 1859, there we go. Okay, so 1860s. Okay. So Wells is coming along and is writing during a time when the meteor came out of the sky, such as it were, of Darwin, and people were trying to figure out in that second generation after his writing sort of hit what the new world, quote unquote, was going to look like. Wells was also writing as an Englishman in London. He was writing underneath the shadow of Karl Marx. So Marxist communism was also thought of as a new way of creating a new man. And so Wells was the guy who sort of merged these two ideas together and not only leveraged what we would call these days nonfiction works, his nonfiction writing, his nonfiction novels, to push ideas. He was a socialist utopian. He believed in eugenics. People don't know a whole lot about that. He was part of the Fabian Society, which at the root of the Fabian Society was we will take Darwin's ideas around survival of the fittest, and we will apply it to specifically to racial groups and peoples. And he was an old colonialist because at the time in the 1890s, London was seated at the height of the English colonial Victorian world. The sun never set on the English Empire. So Wells was raised in a culture where right to rule was thought of as merely fait accompli. And you combine that with ideas around the imperfection of species and the ideas of evolution taken to their logical end. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about this later on, because this also does pop up in the Time Machine, this idea of utopian schemes where men all share everything and everything is beautiful and we're all, eating fruit off of trees, lazily falling into our mouths, and only have to be worried about the propagation of the species, which he's going to talk about here in a little bit. He was writing in that time. Now, with that being said, Dostoevsky was also writing in that time, and Dostoevsky took a much more cynical view.
What?
Yeah,
a
of
Russian?
Human being. I know. Well, so it's interesting. And the Time Machine strikes you, or at least it did. It struck me as the beginning of this idea of what's called a fix-up novel. So when we talk about Martian Chronicles, Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles is a fix-up novel. So it's a collection of essays or a collection of short stories together that run on a particular theme, but aren't linked through transitions from one story to the next. Time Machine was originally published, I found this out through my Wikipedia research, was published in response to a request by W.E. Henley, the editor of the National Observer. Wells had written something called a short story called The Chronic Argonauts. And so Henley challenged him to develop that story or rewrite that series of stories into a series of loosely connected and fictionalized essays. And they were anonymously published in the National Observer from March 17th to June 23rd, 1894. Now, with all that being said, The Time Machine has been adapted into 2 feature films of the same name, as well as 2 television shows and many, 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 many many comic book adaptations of the time machine do exist. It has also indirectly inspired many more works of fiction and many, 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 many media productions. As a matter of fact, the whole conceit underneath Back to the Future, which is the best time travel movie ever created by human beings, full of paradoxes and all, was inspired by the time machine.
Of course. Just, I mean, if he coined this is what's kind of insane to kind of think about. If he coined the term time machine, then kind of anything that has time travel in it with a machine wouldn't exist without this book. It's kind of like trying to think of our fantasy, the fantasy scene without Tolkien. You can't.
Without Tolkien, right?
You can't. Like fantasy doesn't exist without Tolkien.
Well, and think about
in its current form.
We did a mashup episode recently where we talked about the links between Tolkien, Pink Floyd, and one other area. I can't remember the other one that we linked together with Neil Kalachowski, who's a huge fan of Tolkien, huge fan. And I asked him a question that I'm going to ask you, which is not in our questions for today, but I'm going to ask you. So this is something that occurred to me when we talk about time machine. So I asked him, could a book like Lord of the Rings, could a series like Lord of the Rings be written in the next 50 years? Could we write something that was that out of the West, out of the Western culture, that was that powerful and that impactful? Because we'll still be reading Tolkien at the end of this century, which is only 75 years away, by the way, but we'll still be reading Tolkien. Could something like that be written without AI help by a human being in the next 75 years that will have impact for another 100 years hence on the other side of the 22nd century? And Neil said, I'll give you his answer before you answer this question about time machine. Neil said, no, I don't think we can do it. He said, I think that Tolkien was the concentration of all of the last 2,000 years of Western culture and 2,000 years of British culture into one like human being. And his
depth of knowledge is insane.
Right. So could we do something in the face of science fiction? So that's fantasy, right? So in the space of science fiction, if we're bifurcating these two, because most people will slap them together in their heads and move along. But in the space of science fiction, could we get an H.G. Wells in the next 75 years?
I think so, yes, because I feel like my brain is full of references. Like, it's not a book, but even like Star Trek, you go back and you watch the old Star Trek shows, and they're using touchpads and they're using things. And you look at our technology today, you'd be like, oh, that's we had that. Somebody thought about that, and then some engineer went, oh, I bet we could make that now. Right. So I think people will just keep imagining technology. And that's why it's so funny. I was talking to one of my best friends about this, about, how as we conceive of it now, teleportation is impossible. And then the way we think about breaking, it's because we have to break down the person and break down the soul, and you can't break down the blah, 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 blah. And I think my reference point is always like Ford, who was telling his very, very intelligent engineers to do the impossible and create this like single block engine or whatever it technically was, right? He's like, I don't care that you're telling me it's impossible. Do it anyway. And they would go try, and they'd be like, no, but seriously, dude, it's impossible. He'd be like, I don't care. Do it anyway. We're just going to keep doing that. So, and then I think what inspires that is creatives imagining the impossible first and being like, wouldn't it be cool if this was a thing? And then eventually the engineers are like, oh, you know what? I think science has caught up to their imagination and we can make it. And so that's not quite the answer to your question, but in that regard, I think humans are just going to we're just going to keep imagining more and more and more wild things. So I think so. I think
it's interesting you bring up Star Trek, because the reason why, and we've had conversations on this show before about sort of the challenges and the problems in current popular culture entertainment, around Count of Monte Cristo and, other things that we talked about. And I think the big challenge, and I see this with Star Trek, this is why I just want to scream at Paramount, just end it. Put it in mothballs for 75 years. Just end it. Just kill it. It's done. Same thing with, I'm looking at you, Disney, too, your Star Wars. Put it in mothballs for 75 years. Just mothball it. Like, we're done. Right?
Put it in a vault.
Yeah. Put it in a vault. Be done. It's okay. It's fine. Like, I think, and I think
supposedly Marvel is making a comeback. So if Marvel can make a comeback, maybe Star Wars, maybe.
So okay. So Marvel is in a different spot because Stan Lee created something to his credit, and Jack Kirby and John Buscema and all of those guys, they created Steve Ditko, who always gets left out of the conversation because he was a weirdo libertarian and did like 3 things and then left. He couldn't play nice with everybody else. And that's okay. He wasn't supposed to. And they were creating something that in a medium that is so malleable that it just shifts and changes over time. Like, we'll always have comics with us as a medium, which means we'll always have Marvel with us. You might not be called Marvel, but we'll always have Marvel with us as a medium over there somewhere. And it will always be a vein that can be tapped into, no matter how many times you decide you're going to reboot Avengers with Robert Downey Jr. before he croaks off. Okay. Fine. Like, whatever. Yes, I'm a Gen Xer. I said what I said. Y'all can come for me later. Now, with that being said, I think Star Trek and Star Wars also suffers from this, but Star Trek specifically, this is my bugaboo with Star Trek. Star Trek only operates, and by the way, this goes back to the time machine. So H.G. Wells had a conception of the future based on Marxism, communism, Darwinian utopianism, and Darwinian evolution, social norming, right? He actually believed, he was part of the generation where all those ideas were new, and he didn't see any of the downsides. The man went to Stalinist Russia and met with Stalin and thought Stalin was fine. He's like, I just needs to be tweaked a little bit here and there. He's fine. He didn't know all the things we know post World War II. He doesn't have all that history. So I said this on an episode where we were talking about World War I with Libby Younger, right? Talk about Parade's End, right? A great book, right? But I have empathy for any writer who was writing before 1940 because they didn't know. They were writing in the cultural context of the time they were in, and they didn't know any of the horrors that were about to unfold on the back end of the century. They had no clue, right? Or maybe they had some clue, but they misread the tea leaves because they just thought, Stalin, you could tweak him. Hitler, you could do a deal with that guy. Okay, thanks, Joe Kennedy. Whatever, it's fine. I made this point on the podcast before. 1933 Hitler. Yes, we know now in 2025 he was a monster. In 1933, they did not know he was a monster.
Right.
Okay, so like we got to give those people back there a break. Well, I transpose that to Wells, right? Wells imagined a future that was better with all these ideologies, and we're about to read this little section here on the time machine that proves my point. And he projected that future forward. Star Trek now here's my beef with Star Trek. Star Trek now proposes a future based on existential dread and nihilistic cynicism and a perception of sincerity as naivete, because in our current era, the people who are writing Star Trek don't believe in the future. They believe in Google Translate. They believe in AI. They believe in all, but the cultural things underneath that. Wells, every science fiction writer struggles with the cultural stuff, except Wells started with the cultural stuff and then went to the technology. Post World War II, we see this with Heinlein, Philip K. Dick, Charles Gibson, all those guys, right? Even Ray Bradbury kind of fell into this a little bit. So did Isaac Asimov. But they start with the tech and they leave the culture over here. And modern Star Trek starts with the tech and then just projects Twitter and the nonsense on TikTok forward 800 years. So you don't have anybody in the writer's room. You'll appreciate this as a writer. Maybe in the writer's room who's like, what would happen if like all of the, because it's all political now, but let's just pretend that all the right wingers actually like won. The fascists actually won. Let's project that forward 800 years. What happens then? They don't have the imagination for that. They have the imagination for Google Translate, but they don't have the imagination for projecting a better world. And that's my frustration with Star Trek. This is why I want to mothball it. I want to mothball it so we get another generation of people who actually have hope in the future. Right. Because we don't right now. And by the way, we don't right now for very legitimate reasons. We've had 25 years of nonsense from the knocking down of the World Trade Center, the terrorist attacks of the World Trade Center, all the way to, I'm recording this in September of 2025, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It's been one friggin' disaster after another. And the body politic, because we're in the fourth turning, the body politic is in a time of chaos. And you can't write hope in a time of chaos unless you have religious belief. So you actually believe in a transcendent thing for the future. Or you're just like a person who, I believe fundamentally, you're a person who's just like a Pollyanna and you're just going to totally ignore the nonsense. And I don't see very many Pollyannas who are creatives right now. But maybe I'm wrong. So that's my whole rant on Star Trek. That sums up everything. And so I always admire when people bring up Star Trek, but I'm like, just mothball it because we're not going to get it. Like I'm 45 years old. Like
the only, I'll only brought it up in terms of the tech, like for the tech thing. But I totally see. And it's funny to your point, because I go to conventions and one of the panels that I was at was talking about where to start with sci-fi. If you're not a sciencey, not like one of my favorite sci-fi writers, his background education is in like science, engineering, stuff like that. And so the panel was kind of about like, well, if you don't have that, but you want to write sci-fi, how do you write sci-fi? And they were like, just start with kind of what you were saying, like start with the culture, like start with an idea. And then they gave a really helpful definition of sci-fi that now I can't remember, but basically gave me hope that one day I could write sci-fi. So it's like, oh, that would be fun. And basically, I think hey, don't worry so much about the technology. It's more about telling human stories. So that hope is it wants, if it's not there, it wants to be there. It's like it's a seed right now that has not sprouted, and it really needs some water, but there's no water coming right now. Nobody's watering it.
Well, if you look at Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right? So you look at Philip K. Dick's work, right? He had no hope for the future, and that's why Blade Runner works. That's why like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep works, right? Because the perspective he's writing from, the socio-political, geopolitical culture is all warped because of nuclear wars, right? Which he's writing in the 60s in a historical time of the Cold War and mutually assured discretion wasn't really an idea that came around until the 80s, but the template for that idea was there, right? And so he was projecting forward that template, which is, by the way, science fiction does this. It projects forward the template. This is why dystopian science fiction doesn't work, but neither does utopian science fiction, because you're just projecting the dystopia or the utopia of your time forward, however many years, plant a flag here, or now we can all critique everybody and say how cool it, right? Okay, so I think you could probably do Star Trek well if you didn't focus on the tech and you did focus on the culture. But my pushback to that person would be, the writer on the panel on the dais would be, how can you write about culture when you're not culturally confident? Like if you don't actually have pride in your culture, and I don't mean like sinful pride. I mean, you actually have looked at your culture, right, wrong, and indifferent, and said, in comparison to all other cultures, you're not a relativist. In comparison to all of the cultures on the planet, this is the best one. So I'm just going to project that forward, because that's what Roddenberry did. Roddenberry, and this is what irritates, Gen Zers and millennials about boomers. Boomers have cultural confidence.
Yeah.
They just do. Like it drives them. They have no cultural guilt, zero cultural guilt. Now, should they? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but they don't have any. And you've got millennials running around with cultural guilt and anxiety. You got Gen Zers running around with cultural guilt and anxiety. And Gen Xers are like, I have no cultural guilt. I'm cynical. Go away. Leave me alone. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Fine. Just go away. Don't bother me. Don't bother me with your guilt. And don't bother me with your cultural confidence. You know, I once heard Gen X described as a valley of humility stuck between two mountains of ego. So like, how do you write in that space like that? And that's fascinating to me as a person who creates things. How do you write in that sort of cultural environment if you don't have cultural confidence?
I mean, I am a religious person, so I have a confidence in a different culture.
Right. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So I do have cultural confidence. It's just not necessarily in my country.
Right. Right.
So thankfully, I follow one of my, actually the godfather of my children, helps me a lot with the cultural guilt. He's like, hey, when you put this into perspective with the whole American experiment, and then actually you help me with it a lot too. Just like, hey, because you're right, listening to people in my generation, it's just like, it's just all bad. The world's going to shit.
Right.
But it's like, hey, get some perspective like about this experiment. We're doing something nobody's ever tried before, and it's still pretty young. So that all that to say, that's, I guess that's where I write is I just have confidence in a different culture.
Confidence in a different culture. Well, and I think you can write from that space, and that is refreshing because I do think that people need, leaders in particular, need to have cultural confidence.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the culture of their organizations or their institutions, or just the overall, 50,000-foot culture. I do think you have to, as Bonacera says at the beginning of The Godfather, I love that opening for Francis Ford Coppola. The immigrant Bonacera, the Italian immigrant, when he's going to The Godfather to ask him for a favor, starts off with that iconic line. I love it when it opens from the black, and Coppola fades in on him, and he brings him in. He says, and Bonacera says in that Italian immigrant accent, I believe in America. I raise my children in an American fashion, but never to dishonor themselves. But this is how I raise my children. And this is how I was raising my children. I believe in America. Yeah. I absolutely do. Because this is it. This is the...
Yeah.
And yes, I believe in Jesus too. I've been loud about all that too. Jesus in America. Absolutely. Yes. Because guess what? If I didn't, I couldn't do this show. It wouldn't work. None of this works without you got to believe in it. You got to believe there's something here on this third of a continent that's worth saving.
Right.
And worth writing about.
Yeah.
Worth fighting for.
Yeah. It reminds me of West Side Story. It's one of my favorite musicals kind of ever. And thinking about that in the context of Bernstein as a person, things that he was struggling with personally. But then there's that, the America, wait, what is it? Is it just called America? Can't remember exactly the name of the number, but it's the Puerto Ricans going back and forth, the women and the men. Women are like, hey, it sucks here, but it's worth it. And it's better than Puerto Rico. And then the men are like, no, it sucks here. We should go back. And they're like, okay, bye. We'll have kids here then. Both sides have valid points.
Right. I'm not saying there aren't downsides, but you know what? Like, I don't know. If there's one thing I could do with this show, it would be to use these books that have come out of a very specific Western culture. Like Wells comes out of a very specific Western. Yes, he's English, but it's still the West. A very specific Western way of looking at the world that's based on things that matter, and the apotheosis, the pinnacle, the sharp end of the spear of those things comes together, and it always has. It comes together here. It comes together here on this continent among us people. If we don't get it right here, and again, I am saying this in the backwash of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, if we don't get this right here, I don't know where else it's going to get correct.
I think somebody will try it again.
Somebody will try. I don't know that it'll work because it comes out of a very specific, I mean, the next people that try aren't going to have David Hume and natural law like the founding fathers did. Like, they're not going to have that. You know, they're going to have, oh, all those guys screwed up. We don't have to go back to the original thing that they did, that they screwed up. Instead, we'll move forward from the screw up. And I don't, yeah, you know, and I don't know that that's going to be
not necessarily bringing forward the good
right
parts of the foundation, just trying to learn from the mistakes. But really, you need both.
You need both.
You need the good stuff from the foundation and learning from the mistakes, which actually is relevant to one of your questions. That's down
it is relevant to one of the questions.
Swinging about.
We always do this. We always do this when we talk because we were wandering. Okay, so back to the book, back to the time machine. Some of the themes. We're going to talk about themes in a minute, but I want to talk about this piece right here in chapter 8, explanation. Right, talking about worldviews and talking about a little. I want to talk also about a little bit about the arrow of time. But this is the model of the Eloi. So I want to pick this up from H.G. Wells from Time Machine. I'm reading an open source edition. The original 1895 classic. You can get it on Project Gutenberg or on Kindle or anywhere where you download books. Okay. So picking up from here, the time traveler again, talking in first person, relating what he has seen. Beneath my feet, then, the earth must be tunneled enormously, and these tunnelings were the habitats of the new race. Capital N, capital R, by the way. I love that. The presence of ventilating shafts and wells along the hill slopes, everywhere, in fact, except along the river valley, showed how universal were its ramifications. What's so natural, then, as to assume that it was in this artificial underworld that such work was necessary to the comfort of the daylight race was done? The notion was so plausible that I at once accepted it and went on to assume the how of this splitting of the human species. I dare say you will anticipate the shape of my theory, though for myself, I very soon felt that it fell far short of the truth. At first, proceeding from the problems of our own age, it seemed clear as daylight to me that the gradual widening of the present, merely temporary and social difference between the capitalist and the laborer was the key to the whole position. No doubt it will seem grotesque enough to you and wildly incredible, and yet even now there are existing circumstances to point that way. There is a tendency to utilize underground space for the less ornamental purposes of civilization. There is the Metropolitan Railway in London, for instance. There are new electric railways, there are subways, there are underground workrooms and restaurants, and they increase and multiply. Evidently, I thought this tendency had increased till industry had gradually lost its birthright in the sky. I mean that it had gone deeper and deeper into larger and ever larger underground factories, spending a still increasing amount of its time therein, till in the end, even now, does not an East End worker live in such artificial conditions as practically to be cut off from the natural surface of the earth? Again, the exclusive tendency of richer people, due no doubt to the increasing refinement of their education and the widening gulf between them and the rude violence of the poor, is already leading to the closing in their interests of considerable portions of the surface of the land. About London, for instance, perhaps half the prettier country is shut in against intrusion, and this is the same widening gulf which is due to the length and expense of the higher educational process and the increased facilities for and the temptations towards refined habits on the part of the rich that will make that exchange between class and class, that promotion by intermarriage, which at present retards the splitting of our species along lines of social stratification, less and less frequent. So in the end, above ground, you must have the haves, pursuing pleasure and comfort and beauty, and below ground, the have-nots, the workers getting continually adapted to the conditions of their labor. Once they were there, they would no doubt have to pay rent, and not little of it, for the ventilation of their caverns, and if they refused, they would starve or be suffocated for arrears. Such of them as were so constituted as to be miserable and rebellious would die, and in the end, the balance being permanent, the survivors would become as well adapted to the conditions of underground life and as happy on their way as the overworld people were to theirs. And it seemed to me the refined beauty and the exfoliated pallor followed naturally enough. By the way, I love exfoliated. It just means dark. Love that. I remember it was not dark, but white. Sorry, the white pallor. The great triumph of humanity I had dreamed of took a different shape in my mind. It had been no such triumph of moral education and general cooperation as I had imagined. Instead, I saw a real aristocracy, armed with perfected science and working to a logical conclusion the industrial system of today. Its triumph had not been simply a triumph over nature, but a triumph over nature and the fellow man. This, I must warn you, was my theory at the time. I had no convenient cicerone to the pattern of the utopian books. My explanation may be absolutely wrong. I still think it is the most plausible one, but even on this supposition, the balanced civilization that was at last attained must have long since passed its zenith and was now far fallen into decay. By the way, pause. He travels forward into the future, 802,000 years into the future, by the way. Back to the book. The too perfect security of the overworlders had led them to a slow movement of degeneration, to a general dwindling in size, strength, and intelligence. This I could see clearly enough. What had happened to the undergrounders, I did not yet suspect, but from what I had seen of the Morlocks, that, by the by, was the name by which these creatures were called, I could imagine that the modification of the human type was even far more profound than among the quote-unquote Eloi, the beautiful race that I already knew. That's the logical conclusion of Darwinian eugenics. That's the logical conclusion, that the races will split. Each race will become more and more like itself. By the way, just side note, in history, many years after Wells passed away, it was found out that the National Socialists in Germany during World War II had been running around in India and in Africa, measuring people's heads to determine what their genetic phenotypes were. They didn't call it that term then, and to determine which races were the most pure. I'm just going to let everybody sit with that for a moment. So, what are some themes that jump out to us from the time machine? What should we really be focused on, Christen?
Don't be a dick. Wait, no. It's funny. My co-author, it's a brief side story. My co-author and I were like, hey, let's start a Discord, it'll be fun, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, we should, set up some rules, make sure nobody's, and I'm just like, okay, what rules should there be? He's like, really? It just boils down to one. Like, don't be a dick. But the themes that, it's funny. It's not necessarily related to the excerpt that you just read. But when I was thinking about this question, I was reminded of how the time traveler does the impossible, comes back, and nobody will believe him. And after he does that, he's like, I know you guys aren't going to believe me. I don't care. I'm going to tell you the story. Don't ask any questions. And I feel like sometimes leaders, as much as as listening and discourse are both necessary values of good leadership. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just have to be like, okay, sit up, shut down. I need to say this. This is what happened, and I know you guys aren't going to believe me. I think there's a time and a place. So that kind of jumped out at me. I think of
Roy Batty's speech at the end of Blade Runner. I love the line that he gives right to start his Tears in the Rain speech. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And then he goes on and
there's no way to prove it. And so
Harrison Ford's look, by the way, after he gives the speech is classic. It's the classic look of the follower who has no idea what he just heard and just goes, or she just heard and just goes. I think of The Fugitive, right, where Tommy Lee Jones traps Harrison Ford in the tunnel, right, and Harrison Ford is the doctor, says, "I didn't kill my wife," and Tommy Lee Jones goes, "I don't care." And that's it. That's the response. And that's the response I kind of got from some of the folks in who are listening to, or that's the impression you get from folks, But okay, so doing the
So that
impossible in the
was
service of the ungrateful. Or
kind of, yeah. Or just, and sometimes there's gonna be the criticism. Like
Mhm.
you're gonna decide on a course of action. My mentor recently said a bad decision is better than no decision, because a bad decision can be improved upon. Like you can keep making that better. But if you never decide and you never do anything, then there's you can't fix. It's not that you can't fix that, but you know what I mean? Like you gotta decide. And so I think and then you gotta follow through. Even if people are looking at your decision and you've got all this either in your head because of the self-talk 100% is there, and then other people are going to validate that negative self-talk that you don't know what you're doing and this is a terrible decision and all of these risks. And sometimes you as the leader, and again, there's a time and a place for listening, right? But I think there's a gut check too. So as humans, we have this marvelous kind of duality, whatever. We've got the brain, got the big brain, and then we've got the gut, right? And so I think usually, if you're not sure, is this a time to listen, or is this a time to just plow forward? Like check in with your gut. Usually you'll know. But anyway, so there's a time and a place to listen, but then there's a time and a place to just be like, I gotta try this, because if I don't, I'll never know. If I keep listening to the naysayers that say this is impossible, this is a terrible idea, then we'll never progress. We'll never move forward, because they're just looking at, what was it? Oh, I love this quote, but I am gonna butcher it, and I can't remember even who said it. But it's something to the effect of, if you continue to act based on what has already been empirically proven, we'll never learn anything new or get anywhere past what we've already done.
Right.
We'll never defy those odds. We'll never produce anything new.
Well, nothing. You got to have risks, right? And at a certain point, you got to take risks, right? Nothing is without a downside. Nothing is consequence free, right?
Right.
No decision is consequence free. You just have to figure out. No, not even figure out. You have to be okay as a leader, just like the time traveler was, who, by the way, is unnamed. He's only called the time traveler in the book, right? You have to be okay. And by okay, I mean okay at every single level, right? Which kind of ties into the conversation we had in the previous section. But like, you have to be okay at every single level, biologically, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever Lee you want to put on there, ecumenically, however, whatever.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
with the consequences of, okay. I think about this practically in terms of family. So if I'm in a family and there's a decision to be made about, let's make it something small, about where to go for dinner, right? And I know that my kids really like pizza, and you say the word pizza and they're going to lose their mind and they're going to be happy. And my wife doesn't care about pizza. Matter of fact, my wife will probably throat punch me if we go back to Chuck E. Cheese again. And I decide out of the goodness of my heart that we're all going to Chuck E. Cheese tonight because the 3 people will be happy. The 3 humans will be happy. And I will disappoint 1 human. Sure, I've made a utilitarian decision because the good of the many, to go back to Star Trek for just a minute, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And that 1 human, that's a full-size grown-up human, she can go get her needs met in a whole bunch of different ways. And she doesn't have to go to Chuck E. Cheese if she doesn't want to. And so we're going to Chuck E. Cheese. The only way that decision works is if I am comfortable with whatever the outcomes are going to be from deciding that the 3 humans that we're both in charge of are going to Chuck E. Cheese. And if I don't want those consequences, if I am uncomfortable with wherever that may go, all the way from, yeah, you're going to sleep in the bed, but you're going to be all the way on the far side and it's going to be chilly, all the way to, you might be sleeping on the couch, for a couple of nights, because depending upon, how this is all going to go, as long as I'm comfortable with that decision as the leader of the family. And by the way, we could flip the genders. It doesn't matter. Right. Then okay. Like I'm behaving in a leadership capacity. Too many people, I think, particularly in our current era, believe that collaboration hedges all of those consequences. And it doesn't. And it doesn't. That's not what collaboration's for. Collaboration's great for brainstorming or determining where you're going to go to eat with the 3 humans and your wife or your husband in whatever situation. Like that works fine. Okay. Collaboration works there. It's a small decision. But when we start scaling up decisions, collaboration can sometimes fall apart.
Yes.
Kristen is nodding her head.
That's so funny that I feel like censored. Censure. My mentor has been telling me that exact thing. Because I jumped into my business and I really wanted partners, because I am a collaborative artist. I love collaborating. It's my favorite. But yes, even with business partners, somebody has to step forward, make the decision, and see what happens.
Somebody has to be the person upon whom the weight of the failure falls. And someone has to be the person, and this is the critical thing. I wrote about this in my book, 12 Rules for Leaders. You should pick it up. Somebody has to be the person who also is happy enough with how the process went and the outcome that was achieved to give away credit. And everybody focuses on the failure falling on me part because we only ever see the downsides.
Right.
But to go back to the Chuck E. Cheese example, if it works out and my wife's like, okay, yeah, let's go to Chuck E. Cheese, even though I'll throat punch you. I'll throat punch you in the way to the car. And so I get throat punched all the way to the car. But we go to Chuck E. Cheese and my kids are running around and my wife's sitting there. And let's say this is not Chuck E. Cheese, this is Dave & Buster's, so she can have a margarita. And now it's all worked out in the end.
Right.
And by the way, I don't take any credit for that. I'm like, well, the kids decided on this. It's all them. Had nothing to do with me.
No.
Now, if it fails, I'm the one that gets to sleep on the couch because the kids aren't going to sleep on the couch.
Right.
Right. That's what we're looking for in leadership.
Yeah.
So collaboration works up to a point, but we also have to, I think, understand that a bad decision, I love your thinking there, or the way you frame that, a bad decision is better than no decision. The Marines actually believe that. A Marine will be court-martialed. This is one of the most fascinating things I've heard. A Marine officer will be court-martialed for making no decision. But
Whoa.
right, but in the Army, you're court-martialed more likely than not for making a bad decision. Because I once heard a Marine frame this for me, a Marine officer frame this for me. Marines die whether you make a good decision or a bad decision. Marines die. That's what we do. So just make a decision. In the Army, it's a different thing. It's not Army guys die if we make a good decision or a bad decision. It's what's the best possible decision you could have made under these circumstances, and then make that one, right? And this is something fundamental that's different between the branches. I find that to be incredibly fascinating because most of real life is downsides. Most of the time you're making a decision out of a series of terrible options that you didn't choose. You're like, oh, we faced with all these options and I didn't choose any of them. And in a perfect world, I would have none of these. And I don't live in that world. I don't live in the Darwinian utopia with the Eloi.
Which is not perfect, by the way.
No, it's not.
So, more themes for leaders.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just kind of, one of my coaches always talked about how life is 50-50, no matter where you are, no matter how successful, how poor, how rich, how many kids, how few kids, whatever it is, life is 50-50, good, bad. And there are utopian aspects when he jumps into the future and, humanity has achieved everything that they have been gunning for. But there's some creepy darkness there. Like they're food now. Like the haves are now like, Jesan was reading it earlier. I don't know if you caught it, but they're basically just fattened cattle, just waiting to be eaten. And they have some awareness of this, which is why they fear the dark and why they fear the Morlocks. But that's it. They're frolicking around, eating, making love, eating fruit, bathing in the river, having the perfect life, terrified that they're going to be eaten next. So that's like
light
and dark. Light and dark. It's like there's good and bad.
So when I was reading
Utopia.
When I was reading this, I was thinking of our current cultural moment and what flashed in my brain, because I have all these illusions in my brain like a steel trap. So I was thinking of the U.S. Congresswoman from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was at some event a few years ago now, and she wore a dress that said "Eat the Rich" on it, or had "Eat the Rich" written on it, a white dress with a red writing. You can see it online. And it was like some Met Gala, something where they like show off, $1 billion dresses or whatever. And she had it specially designed for her. It was during the Biden administration. It was like a big deal, whatever. And I think about the sentiment behind that.
Yeah.
And I think in relation particularly to the Eloi and the Morlocks, and I'm not the first person to make this allusion, but when we're talking about, and by the way, just so you know how exactly dark my brain is, I've never admitted this on the show. This is a new one. So one more layer gets peeled away. I am fascinated by what makes a person eat another person, like the psychology behind that. Like, how do you get to that point? Like, I understand if you're in a plane crash in the Andes mountains, desperation. I absolutely understand that. I understand, there are people who they will die before they will eat another, they'll die before they go there, right? Now we have to counterpose that with, in recent world history, Native American tribes, North American, South American tribes that cannibalized each other. There are cannibal tribes running around the world today. Mm-hmm. There are people in the Western world who have, this recently happened in Germany, probably about 10 years ago. Someone advertised online for to eat somebody, and somebody showed up and ate that person. And I believe they were prosecuted in Germany, and the guy went to jail. Krista is now shocked. Again, this is my steel trap brain. I think of all this merges together, right? And so I'm talking about the Morlock of the Eloy. I wasn't really going to focus on the cannibalism, but you brought it up. So you opened the door for me. So I'm gonna walk through. If we're eating the leisure class metaphorically, which is I'm sure what AOC would say her dress meant, it's metaphorical eating. Yeah, okay. But it's a real easy leap to go from metaphor, particularly in the times in which we are in now, to go from metaphor to actuality. Without people being pushed much to go in that direction. What does it say? And Wells even says that, like, oh well, this is just a natural thing. Like, it's fine.
Shouldn't judge it.
We shouldn't judge it.
We shouldn't judge it.
Like, what are we doing? How do we not? I guess it's a morality question, really.
Well, and if you're, well, I don't know enough about like about Marx, like the nitty gritty, but like, do they even believe in more like morality? No. Do they? Yeah, I didn't think so. No. So then of course he's going to be like, well, I shouldn't judge it.
No, they're historical determinists. Like you can see that even in Wells' writing, they believe that history determines what people do, and the battle between capital and labor is the driving force that's in the not in the Communist Manifesto, that's in Das Kapital. The battle between capital and labor is the driving force of all human history. There's nothing else outside of that. Religion is the opiate of the masses. It's just BS. It's designed. Morality is just BS. It's designed to cover up our brute, savage nature, which again, Wells was as a Fabian socialist would have been right alongside of that, right? He would have thought that was absolutely a correct way of analyzing epistemologically reality. And I think he's utterly and completely and totally incorrect, and that's bananas in pajamas. If I'm to be friendly. So
we're
well, okay.
Themes for leaders. Oh, so that's where I was going.
So
yeah, I was going with the 50-50. Hey guys, so for leaders, 50-50. You're gonna push. You're gonna achieve some really great things. Most likely, eventually, if you keep going, right? You're gonna fail. Succeed.
Yeah.
Even when you succeed, you reach that new level in your business. You reach that new revenue goal. That new, whatever. You're scaling. You're starting out. You're in a startup and you obtain regular revenue.
Yeah.
There's gonna be good and bad. My coach liked to say, there is not better than here. Like you can easily conceive of the things that will be better there. Like my business is currently in startup mode. So that, in 5-10 years, when we're not in startup mode anymore, there are definitely things that there are going to be better. But we will have scaled and there will be more problems that I'm not dealing with now because our business is smaller, right? So the 50-50 will be there. And so I think leaders really just need to remember that. And it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean anything is wrong. And your job is to not necessarily keep your eye on the prize. I don't know why that just popped into my head, but also keep morale up around you, because everybody else, leadership is not necessarily their job. And a lot of them might be, unless you're very attentive to your own company's culture or whatever leadership position you're in, to the culture that you're leading. You got to pay attention, especially to the naysayers, because that can get you can get a mutinous set of folks real quick if you're not, managing that, leading in that way as well. It's not just about, especially if you're a leader in business, it's not just about the revenue and all of that. The revenue, the product, blah, blah, blah. It's you manage your people too. Take care of your people. I think I say that probably every time I'm on your podcast.
You probably do, but it's true. I mean, like, you wouldn't be the only one. Like, everybody says that because at the end of the day, these books that we've covered, from Moby Dick to Jane Austen to The Time Machine to we'll be talking about, or we're going to be, one of the books that we're going to be covering in November is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And it doesn't matter what the genre of the book is. It doesn't matter even who the author is. Fundamentally, the leadership themes that are embedded in all these books focus around themes that are universal and that have not changed through time, or as my grandma would have said, climb, CLIME, time or climb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that somehow we need to go to a leadership book written by some pointy-headed intellectual to get these ideas is one of the reasons why I'm doing this show, right? Because you know, we're fighting uphill against that, right? Or downhill, depending upon your perspective. So, so yeah, taking care of your people, bringing them up, understanding consequences. One last thing I'd like to talk about a little bit before we switch modes and sort of try to wrap up here. This idea of doing the impossible in the service of the ungrateful, right? Okay. So, again, at a very practical level, right? Going back to the Chuck E. Cheese analogy one more time. If I take my kids to Chuck E. Cheese because they've decided they want to go to Chuck E. Cheese and it's all great, my wife's having the margarita, she registered her objections in the car, but now everything's getting better. And then we do the Chuck E. Cheese experience. Everybody has the cardboard pizza. It's terrible. And the rat comes over and I want to punch the rat because I'm in a mood and I'm having water because I got to drive.
Yeah.
And then we all leave, we all get in the car. And my kid in the back seat says, wow, that sucked. Now I've had that experience with my children, right? And the level of, I'll be honest, as a parent, leader, the level of frustration, dare I say rage, rises up inside of me.
Oh,
is
no, yeah.
Yes.
My son is 3 months old. I'm becoming acquainted with, and my daughter's a toddler, so it's just like rage is the word, and it's not something I think parents talk about. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, it's okay.
It's not a word I think parents like to admit to themselves or anybody out loud. It is rage. It is what. Go ahead.
No, and then you, but my solution, just so you have a solution, right? Because my kids are significantly older. You're at the beginning. I'm almost at the end of, at least with 3 of the 4 of them. I'm at the end of the thing, and with the other one, he's 8. So like we're getting into a different thing there. Yep. Here's what you do. You take your hand. This is the only technique I've learned. If you're driving the vehicle, or even if you're not, you take either your right hand or your left hand, depending on which side of the front seat you're sitting in, and you slowly roll down the window. You just hit the button. Just let it roll down, and let the night air wash over your face. Let it wash away the rage. Let it wash away the rage as you go down, the 405 or whatever, where you happen to be living at. From that Chuck E. Cheese experience that you just spent all that time and emotional effort, which seemed impossible, and now this person is ungrateful. And then you roll up the window slowly and you say, I really would like for you to just say thank you. Just show a little gratitude. Just say thank you. Now, with your children, if you're in a parenting situation, that becomes now a matter of verbal discipline and verbal correction, right? Yeah. With people that are adults, though, who struggle with gratitude, I guess the question becomes,
oh my gosh,
how do you get them right? How do you deal with people that are ungrateful if you're a leader?
Honestly, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just part of the job. So just how make sure that your mental well-being, you have support. Let's put it so you don't fly off the handle and accidentally put a proverbial gun to your company's head and implode, right? So that I think that would be my biggest recommendation. Yeah, make sure that your mental and emotional health, that you're maintaining that you've got your support set up, that you've got your habits. Those are just as important as the regular processes that will grow or maintain or whatever it is you're trying to do in your leadership position. Your mental well-being is paramount, because you're going to make decisions. People are going to come for you. People are going to be ungrateful. And I'm talking to because I actually have, there's this very specific example in my business right now that I, just in case, I'm not going to say any specifics, but man, I'm going to be hitting that in December, and I hopefully will remind myself of my own my own
I'll send you a
recommendations.
clip. I'll send you
Yeah,
a clip
yeah,
for this
right. You're
episode in
like,
December.
you make sure you're doing your journaling and you talk to your coach and go to the beach and make sure you just take care of you. Go get a massage. It'll be okay. The world will not end. It feels like it. It feels like it. And then people will come for you though. And yeah, and ultimately, I think for me, I'm in the middle of it. My mentor is kind of on the other side of it. And I love his I can't remember if we're allowed to curse or like to the extent of what we're allowed to curse, but DGAF, right? He just doesn't give
Yep. Right.
he doesn't give any.
Right.
And I'm like, man, I wish I was there because I don't. I take everything personally. But he's just like, what else?
Yeah.
I don't, whatever. I don't care. I'm
Right.
retired, and you guys can't like. What are you gonna do? You're gonna yap, and then you're either gonna stay and continue to give us business, or you're gonna leave. And I
Right.
have enough confidence in my business model that I really don't care if you leave. In fact, please do. You know, if you don't find enough value here, take off. That's okay. That's what business is about, right?
You said
Nobody
the
owes
key
you
word.
anything.
That's right. You said the
Nobody
key
owes,
word.
right? Value, right?
Confidence. No, confidence.
Confidence.
He
Okay.
has confidence. So
Oh yeah.
the whole thing
Yes.
with like an
Security.
imposter syndrome that
Yeah.
goes around online, it has been going around online for the last 15 years. I see it all over LinkedIn. You know, the whole boss babe, we're talking about women,
Yeah.
or we're talking about men. I got up and did 8,000 lifts and ran 450 miles and journaled and got my personal affirmations, so I could feel confident about making these decisions, and I'm crushing it. That whole entire nonsense that you see in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial culture online is driven by people that have a deep lack of confidence in their own decisions because they are, and I loved how you mentioned that he's older and retired, because they are young. And we've done a terrible job in our culture in the last 2 or 3 generations of of demonstrating to people that life is long and you have to sort of earn your keep to your benchmarks. And I can say this as someone who's in my mid 40s, wandering towards a half century of living in this world. There are things that I just would never have known at 20. I just would never have known at 20. I wanted to know them at 20.
Right.
I could intellectualize them at 20.
Right.
But to actually know them,
right.
I didn't know them until I was 40.
And then also that's okay, because I feel like
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe this is just a millennial thing, like my generation, something my generation struggles with. It's like it's almost like because the knowledge is out there, then we should be that much more advanced, and then we freak out when we're not because we're just not there yet.
So knowledge is not wisdom. This is what I would tell every millennial. Any millennial listening to this, anybody who's between the ages of, what's a millennial now, 30 and 45, 30 or 44.
I'm 35, so
yeah. So right, okay, yeah, you're
give
right.
Give or take
there.
10 years. Yeah,
you're right in there. So it's okay to not have the wisdom now. You're gonna get the wisdom, and Google ain't gonna deliver it to you.
No.
DoorDash ain't going to deliver it to you. You can't get it on demand. You can't swipe left or swipe right to get it. It just it's sorry, it's not on demand.
Can give it to you, like I think like you said, intellectually. Like if you're well read, you read these, right? You're listening to Jesan, like that will help the wisdom come maybe a little faster. If you steep yourself, right, and really contemplate. But I think, the crux of it all is just like not giving an F.
Well, and the shortcut is always the long way around. So if you're looking, and I've never really talked about shortcuts on this show, but one of the reasons why the time traveler goes and gets in his time machine is because he's looking for a shortcut to Utopia. And he went too far. He went too far. And so there are no shortcuts to utopian outcomes, because there aren't utopian outcomes, there aren't dystopian outcomes either, by the way. It's neither one. They're just outcomes. But the shortcut that you're looking for is always the long way around. And people forget this, right? The point was made, interestingly enough, in the Billy Bob Thornton character in the show Landman from Taylor Sheridan. He's talking to the young city lawyer that they send out, the young female city lawyer that they send out to like deal with him on his oil stuff. And the thing that I and by the way, I'm still looking for shortcuts, right? It's a temptation to find the shortcut. Yeah. It's always a temptation to find the hack, find the shortcut, find the thing. And the thing is, if you do that, you actually do far more damage. Even looking for the shortcut does far more damage than just going the long way around.
I think the other danger with looking for shortcuts is that I mentioned this earlier. It's predicated on this belief that there is better than here. And something that I am working on, right now, is not being in such a rush to get to the revenue goal, just enjoy the journey. But also because I'm a mom, right? There's a lot more going on in my life. Like I have other leadership positions other than my business. So the balance of all of that, just don't be in such a rush. Enjoy the journey, learn, like you'll get there. And a lot of times we hate this. I hate this. A lot of times there is this idea. I remember hearing this, years ago when I was just starting as like an online entrepreneur, was you have to slow down to go faster.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all like, yeah, cool, I'll do that. And I'm telling you right now that I always thought I would do that. And the way that is manifesting in my life right now, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, right. I don't know. Wait, are you sure that's what that means? Are you just, that can't be right. I don't want to, I'm just fighting it. I'm fighting it tooth and nail. And it's like what you said, like, just stop looking for the shortcuts, do things slow, enjoy the ride. You get one life. Like, stop being so we're all stress balls. Like,
well, you're not, what are you missing? What are you missing? So there's this whole idea that came after I was out of my 30s. I didn't hear about it until I was in my 40s, but this whole idea of the fear of missing out, right?
Yeah.
But missing what? What am I missing?
Right.
Like I see this
if you're so busy in being a rush, you're missing your life now. Right. You're so worried about missing out there that you're missing here.
Right. Yeah. Like I've got a 20-year-old that lives in my house. And one of the things that we worked with her through when she was in the late era of high school and a little bit towards the beginning of college, but she was finally through that, was this idea that, and we also don't give cell phones to our kids early, and we have a whole bunch of other rules set up to kind of mitigate a lot of this nonsense, right? But I have a 15-year-old girl that lives in my house. And she has no cell phone and she's happy.
Ooh,
it can be done. I want to tell all the millennial parents out there, it can be done. It can be done
so much. Yes.
All you have to do is be willing to live with the consequences of what that means. And by the way, they're very easy consequences. And the thing I point out is our baby boomer and Gen X parents, they did it and they didn't apologize. That's the part that drives all of us crazy, is that they didn't apologize. Right. But why would they? They didn't need to. They just picked a route and they just went for it. So anyway, this idea of fear of missing out. So one of the things that I worked through, or that my wife and I worked through with our daughter, is you're not missing anything. You're making choices. You cannot do all of the things. So you have to curate and make decisions.
That's a great word.
And if you don't curate and make decisions, then you will be stuck in analysis paralysis and you will do nothing and you will go nowhere. Now, we can say this from the outside as wisdom, but it didn't become real until she went off with her first real, like, sort of big girl job, for lack of a better term. And she saw other people in her generation, in her time, paralyzed by analysis of things that she'd already made decisions on. And she went, oh, click. Oh, that's so all I got to just do is just keep doing that. And now she's moving forward. This is something where I think, well, I'll frame it this way. And this is, again, every episode I bring up movies and every episode I bring up jiu-jitsu. And so here's the moment. Get ready for it. In jiu-jitsu, it takes you 10 to 12 years to get a black belt. Most people don't want to do the same moves in a similar formation for 10 to 12 years while risking injury and pain and not being able to bend over in the morning to get out of bed for 12 years to get a strip of cloth that's black. And that's okay. I'm not recommending for you to do jiu-jitsu. Everybody who's listening out here, jiu-jitsu is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. But if it is for you, just remember, and my instructor always says this, and it's absolutely the truth. He's 34, so he's right in the mix, right? Enjoy the process. It's going to take you 10 to 12 years. It's fine. Just come in and enjoy the process. Now, what I see for folks, particularly folks who are a generation down from me, is they'll come in 4 days a week right off the bat, and they'll just start because they're like, oh no, I can shortcut this.
Yeah.
And they find out that the shortcut is the long way around, and they're injured, and then they're out, or they don't advance, or they don't go as fast as they wanted to, or the instructor looks at them and goes, oh, well, that's all cool and everything, but you're not ready. And then they get frustrated and fly off the handle. And it's patience. Patience takes time.
Yeah.
And to your point, I loved how you framed that, Christen. You only have one life. Well, not only, but you have one life to live. It's this one. It's cool. We can just chill out. And so the joke on me in the jiu-jitsu school is, oh, he's on the 15-year plan. I'm like, yeah, I tell everybody I'm on the 15-year plan. What else am I going to be doing for 15 years?
Right. So
like,
yeah, it's so, yep. There's a couple of analogies that, I'm a voice teacher, and I tell this to all of my beginners. My passion right now is working with people who tell themselves they can't sing. My students, I teach them classical technique, but I pursued an opera career for 10, 12 years. And I tell them, ballerinas, prima ballerinas are still practicing their tendu, which is the most basic ballet move ever. Same thing with martial artists. They're always practicing that basic punch, the basic block, the basic stance, horse stance, whichever martial art you're doing. And it's not sexy. And that's the same thing with mindset work. That's the same thing with business. Any mastery involves doing little daily things that are not exciting. They're not sexy. They're mundane. This is the same for raising children. They're mundane. This was the word that popped up in my coaching actually last week. Mundane. Fall in love with the mundane. Whatever you're doing, like, find a way to relish it, because this is your journey. This is what you're meant to be doing, presumably, if you've done all of that. This is what you've curated.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you're deciding. Believe in your decisions enough to be like, yeah, let's do this. Let's enjoy every little bit, the ins and outs.
One last question from your perspective. And then we'll go back to the book. Do you think we struggle? No. So the devices are blamed for a lot. Are we struggling in the backwash to deal with, to address, to manage too much dopamine?
Oh, yes.
At a biological level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. These devices I keep talking about my coaches. Guys, I need a lot of help. I have so much drama. Maybe this is just my personality type. I don't know, but I have so much head drama that I'm like, I just constantly need other people's input. What is it? The 5 strengths, whatever. Input is one of my, I can't remember what test that is. Yeah. Input is one of my top 5. So I always need a coach in my ear, because otherwise I just spiral and I turn into a puddle on the ground.
I think input is number 2 for me, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, you like to read, so I
do. Yeah. Look at that.
But my coach was talking about, she was leading a challenge, a like screen less challenge, and she just talks about I don't think we realize this. Everything, the scrolling on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even down to the notifications, the colors of the notifications on your phone, everything is designed to keep you on that platform and keep you scrolling. And they're not stupid. Like, they hired the experts and they were like, what does this to the human brain? I don't know if that's actually what they did, but all I know is that these are designed, yes, to trigger dopamine. So 100%, Jesan, I think that's true. We have to figure out how to enjoy life without all of that dopamine, because actually a turning point, it's funny, you have to be careful when you say turning point right now, but a turning point in my life was actually back in when the lockdowns all happened during COVID. And I actually, during that, most people were on social media more. And that was when I had decided I'm not going to do it anymore. I didn't delete everything because of my line of work. You kind of have to maintain a social media presence. So I didn't delete anything, but I took it off my phone. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. And that's when I started writing my book. So if you have any sort of creative, or if you're leading, you have this idea, this vision, something, get off your phone.
Yeah.
Get off social media. Stop doom scrolling and go do something. And that's hard. And I guess, to Jesan's point, recognize that when you move in that direction, that you are fighting an addiction because of how social media and the phones and the devices are designed to keep you on them. And again, you don't have to take my word for granted. You can go look this up. It's science. This is just how they're designed, because they want you to stay on them. Because the more you use their product, the more you'll buy another one when it breaks, or when the latest model comes out, or whatever, So just be aware. And even if you don't change anything, just be aware. They are hacking your brain. So whenever you decide that you want to go do something and create instead of consume, you're going to have to fight that addiction. That sucks and it's hard, but you can do it.
Well, and I would say that in addition to that, I would add on that, the sort of the layer, the frosting on that cake that Christen has baked for us is this. If indeed the technologists that created the phones were on the same mindset as the technologists who are creating the robots, if indeed we do have 100,000 humanoid robots, as we talked about and referenced way back in the Philip K. Dick episode, if indeed those do get shipped in the next 5 to 10 years, and then we go to scale on humanoid robots, the dopamine inducing behaviors that the technologists have tracked and cataloged about us very carefully will be imbued in those robots. And that should be fun times for everyone.
For everyone. Yay!
Back to the book.
Yeah.
Back to the book. Back to
learning from our mistakes.
Machine.
Wait.
Learning from yes, exactly.
I'm pretty sure this is a bad idea. Let's do it anyway.
Yeah, it's fine.
It'll make us money.
We're gonna pick up at chapter 6, the sunset of mankind. Speaking of which, so this is right where the beginning of the book, and he's looking around at where he has landed, and this is where, by the way, we get his date. So we're going to pick this up here. The calm of the evening was upon the world as I emerged from the great hall. The scene was lit by the warm glow of the setting sun. At first, things were very confusing. Everything was so entirely different from the world I had known, even the flowers. The big building I had left was situated on the slope of a broad river valley, but the Thames had shifted perhaps a mile from its present position. I resolved to mount the summit of a crest, perhaps a mile and a half away, from which I could get a wider view of this, our planet, in the year 800 and 2701 AD. For that, I should explain, was the date the little dials of my machine recorded. As I walked, I was watching for every impression that could possibly help to explain the condition of ruinous splendor in which I found the world, for ruinous it was. A little way up the hill, for instance, was a great heap of granite, bound together by masses of aluminum, a vast labyrinth of precipitous walls and crumbled heaps, amidst which were thick heaps of very beautiful pagoda-like plants, nettles possibly, but wonderfully tinted with brown about the leaves and capable of stinging. It was evidently the derelict remains of some vast structure. To what end built, I could not determine. It was here that I was destined at a later date to have a very strange experience, the first intimation of a still stranger discovery, but of that I will speak in its proper place. Looking round with a sudden thought from a terrace on which I rested for a while, I realized that there were no small houses to be seen. Apparently, the single house, and possibly even the household, had vanished. Here and there, among the greenery, were palace-like buildings, but the house and the cottage, which form such characteristic features of our own English landscape, had disappeared. Communism, I said to myself. And on the heels of that came another thought. I looked at the half dozen little figures that were following me. Then in a flash, I perceived that all had the same form of costume, the same soft, hairless visage, and the same girlish rotundity of limb. It may seem strange, perhaps, that I had not noticed this before, but everything was so strange. Now I saw the fact plainly enough. In costume and in all the differences of texture and bearing that now mark off the sexes from each other, these people of the future were alike. And the children seemed, to my eyes, to be but miniatures of their parents. I judged then that the children of that time were extremely precocious, physically at least, and I found afterwards abundant verification of my opinion. Pause for just a moment. This is where I get the sense that Aldous Huxley read a lot of H.G. Wells's work, because you see this idea brought to its logical conclusion in A Brave New World, which I did read during this period of time, but I did not include on the podcast for various reasons. Back to the book. Seeing this ease and security in which these people were living, I felt that this close resemblance of the sexes was, after all, what one would expect. For the strength of a man and the softness of a woman, the institution of the family, and the differentiation of occupations are mere militant necessities of an age of physical force. Where population is balanced and abundant, much childbearing becomes an evil rather than a blessing to the state. Where violence comes but rarely and offspring are secure, there is less necessity, indeed there is no necessity, for an efficient family. And the specialization of the sexes with reference to their children's needs disappears. We see some beginnings of this even in our own time, and in this future age it was complete. This, I must remind you, was my speculation at the time. Later, I was to appreciate how far it fell short of the reality. While I was musing upon these things, my attention was attracted by a pretty little structure, like a well under a cupola. I thought in a transitory way of the oddness of wells still existing, and then resumed the thread of my speculations. There were no large buildings towards the top of the hill, and as my walking powers were evidently miraculous, I was presently left alone for the first time. With a strange sense of freedom and adventure, I pushed on up to the crest. There I found a seat of some yellow metal that I did not recognize, corroded in places with a kind of pinkish rust and half smothered in soft moss, the armrest cast and filed into the resemblance of griffins' heads. I sat down on it, and I surveyed the broad view of our old world under the sunset of that long day. It was as sweet and fair as I have ever seen. The sun had already gone below the horizon, and the west was flaming gold, touched with some horizontal bars of purple and crimson. Below was the valley of the Thames, in which the river lay like a band of burnished steel. I've already spoken of the great palaces dotted about among the variegated greenery, some in ruins and some still occupied. Here and there rose a white or silvery figure in the waste garden of the earth. Here and there came the sharp vertical line of some cupola or obelisk. There were no hedges, no signs of proprietary rights, no evidences of agriculture. The whole earth had become a garden. H.G. Wells betrays himself in this. It is often said that man has a God-sized hole in his heart. Christians will say this quite a bit. And they will assert from C.S. Lewis on down, the apologetics will, that God, that in particular Jesus, is the only thing that can fill that God-sized heart. And Wells betrays the size of his God-sized heart with this writing in the time machine, because really what the time traveler is looking down upon from his seat high above the view, he's looking down at the Garden of Eden, at least right at the beginning. By the way, there's always snakes in the garden, which is one thing Wells couldn't really get his arms around. And by the way, he's got good company. Most secular atheists, even in our own time, can't get their arms around the concept of evil. Why is there evil? Why is there injustice? This is the thing they think trips up believers who have filled that hole in their heart. Oh, they believe this. They believe that's the key question that's going to somehow have us all who do believe, hit ourselves in the head with our, palm of our hand and say, well, I could have had a V8. I never knew. I could have abandoned this God thing. Wow. I didn't know that until you came along and exposed the idea of evil to me. Well, the reality is that the time machine is Wells's attempt is his attempt to try to navigate and understand the human condition. And, to do that in a way that is explicitly anti-religion and focused on technology would have been really hard for him in the culture that he came out of. And so he's going to put this illusion in there and he's going to work forward from it because he knows that it's the one that most people are going to be familiar with, right? It was going to be the one that could sell the most. And it's also part of his cultural milieu, right? His cultural time. He could no more avoid talking about or intimating the Garden of Eden than Ray Bradbury could avoid intimating and talking about the Cold War and the Martian Chronicles, right? Or Philip K. Dick about thermonuclear destruction in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. We have talked a lot about a lot of things. We haven't really talked about time travel here, the actual mechanics of it. Now, I understand, according to Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson and all the big brains in the world, that we may potentially maybe be able to travel to the future like the time traveler did. But what they propose is that according to the current laws of physics, the way we currently understand quantum mechanics and everything else, and theories of relativity, there is no way to go backwards. There's no way to return. There's no, as Nietzsche would say, idea of return. So once you go, you're basically gone. Now, they also propose that you need a machine big enough, something with like ion engines, that can really like warp a black hole or turn something or create a wormhole of some kind, because we actually don't have the power. Well, as Michio Kaku would say, we're not a fourth level civilization yet. We haven't yet figured out how to take the energy from our nearest star and warp it or change it or utilize it for our own means in a way that could power the whole planet and all of our energy needs and still have stuff left over, which is what he proposes fourth level civilizations do. He says we are merely, if I remember correctly, we are merely a second level civilization. We're still rudely pulling our modes of energy out of the ground. Oh, okay. You terrible people. All right.
So, I know.
Okay. Thanks, Michio Kaku. So I guess my question here is twofold. Number one, will we have Garden of Edens in the future? Like, can we get there from here? But then number two, can our technology get us in time to a Garden of Eden?
No, I don't think so. But this answer really can only be, I can only answer, it will be informed by my dearly held religious beliefs. They're very close to, and it's what it's, so no, I don't think so. I think, man, I think the nature of man's fall precludes us from being able to get back to the Garden of Eden.
Right.
The only thing, from Catholic theology that will get us to paradise is, the second coming of Christ, blah, blah, blah. And that's all very theological, mystical. So no, I don't think there's anything.
The book of Revelations is a wild book.
It is.
Everybody should read it.
Yeah, but don't go read those. What is it? That was the 90s. There's just a set fire to
Oh yeah, don't
this
bother. Don't
history.
bother with any of
Don't do
that.
that.
Any of
Don't
that.
read those. Don't go
Don't
there.
read the dispensationalism stuff. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're
Don't
gonna
read that.
don't.
Don't.
No.
Um,
No.
so no, I don't think there's anything humans can do. I think we're gonna keep trying,
Mhm.
especially as we become more and more humanistic. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but human centered, where we just
Mhm.
keep focusing on ourselves.
Mhm.
And we're like, well, of course, like we can do anything. We're just gonna keep trying. So we're gonna keep
Mhm.
trying to get there, and we'll do some amazing things, and we'll do
Mhm.
some not so amazing things, I'm sure, because that's what's happened in the past, right? We've done some amazing things trying to get there, and we've done some not so amazing things trying to get there, um, until the second coming.
Well, and so this makes me wonder, right? So we talked a lot during this series of books over the last probably month and a half. We've talked a lot about we talked a lot about aliens. We talked about space travel. We talked about now we're talking about time. Well, talking about time travel, kind of. We've talked about the theory put forth by Ray Bradbury in the Martian Chronicles that we won't change Mars. Mars will instead change us.
Mm.
Robert Heinlein in Stranger in a Strange Land, brings the man from Mars down to Earth. And of course, because he wrote this book in the 1940s, the man from Mars starts a church, which, well, sorry, he starts a discipline, which eventually becomes a church. We postulated on this podcast with John Hill that he would start a political party rather than a
Yeah,
church if he came
there you
down
go.
these days. That
Yes.
would be the thing.
Yeah.
Because we've sublimated
Be an
all of our
influencer.
yeah, we've sublimated all of our religious impulses to politics in
There
America
you
anyway,
go.
which is always a good idea.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's totally fine.
yeah, there'll be no negative, there'll be no downside or suboptimal outcomes from that at all. I'm sure it'll all
Mm-mm.
work out well.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, um,
Mm-hmm.
so we and now with the time machine, time travel is the ultimate manipulation that human beings are looking.
Mm.
It's the ultimate, other than maybe immortality, it's the ultimate thing that rich people talk about in real terms, but I only ever hear wealthy people. And I don't mean like a little bit wealthy. I don't mean like the guy down the street who like owns
Obscenely
like,
wealthy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the guy down the street who owns like 4 Toyota dealerships and you can like go to your local country club and see him like golfing on Thursday. I'm talking about
Right.
that guy. I'm talking about like the obscenely super wealthy Jeff Bezos yacht people. Okay. They're the only ones I ever hear talking about time travel or immortality or genetic manipulation of people in the future or now. We're trying to biohack, to the point about shortcuts, biohack their own biology. They're the only people who are doing this kind of nonsense. And it's because they don't want to outlive their money. It's really fundamentally they're greedy and vain. Now, along the way to being greedy and vain, will they find some things that are good for humanity? For sure. And that are marketable for humanity? For sure. And that are useful for humanity getting to where they need to go? For sure. They're going to find it on the way to there's a lot of different ways to get to the opera, but they're going one way or the other. And time travel is one of those things that there's less conversation about this in my time and in my era over the last 20 years. When I was coming up, there was a lot of discussion about it. And then we all sort of stopped talking about it right around September 11th. And there's been almost no talk about it ever since. And I wonder if it's because if you go to the future and you see that it's the same nonsense of today, to go back to my point about Star Trek, just take it to its logical conclusion tomorrow, and you can't get back to warn anybody, you're stuck. You're stuck. So the greatest time travel show on television ever made is Quantum Leap. Greatest one. And I've talked about this on the last episode. I'm talking about it now. Quantum Leap is the greatest time travel show on television ever made because it comes from a simple conceit. Dr. Scott Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap accelerator and vanished. And he had one theory. Dr. Samuel Beckett had the theory that one could time travel, but only within one's lifetime. That's brilliant. And it makes perfect sense. Because think about it. You said you're in your 30s. If you were born 20 years before your birth date, you'd be a totally different person.
100%.
And if you were 10 now or 11, number one, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but number two, you'd be a totally different person.
Right.
Right. You can only time travel in between the year you were born and your death year.
Interesting.
That's it. That's the only time you've got. You can't go beyond those things. That's genius, because that speaks directly to the human condition.
Right.
Because if you go past it, like if I got into a time travel vehicle, a quantum leap accelerator, which sounds like an awesome idea, and went like way past my own death date, whatever that is, and for a male of my time who was born in the year that I was born in, I only get 72 years according to the actuarial tables. So it's currently 2025. I am in my mid 40s. 72 is 31 or 32 years from now. Let's just say 30. Let's round the 75. Give me a couple extra years. 30 years from now. Okay. 30 years from now, 2025, 2055, right? If I go past 2055, I have no anchor. I don't know what's happening. There could be thermonuclear war. There could be a planetary meltdown. The entire United States could have slid off the map and no longer exists as a geopolitical entity, or everything could be great. People could be like the Eloi walking around, eating, whatever, strawberries falling in their mouths. More likely than not, of course, people will still be manually pulling the dishes out of the dishwasher and being frustrated that the AIs aren't doing and the robots aren't doing the things for them that they really want to do. And people will have married robots or something. That's more likely than not what will happen past 2055. But you'll still have to write poetry by hand, because like the pencil is still the greatest instrument, even in 2065, that's ever been created. Okay. So I can only travel between, what year was I born? 1979 and 2055. That's it. That's all I get. I don't get any more than that. That's why I think time travel doesn't work, because we actually can't conceive, because of the human condition. We can predict that, yes, there'll be greed, vanity, deceit, hypocrisy. There'll be all the bad stuff. There'll also be love and compassion and understanding and empathy. But where that whack-a-mole pops up, this is why there was no black people on the Jetsons, because the people who came up with the Jetsons couldn't conceive of that. If they'd been born 20 years later, there would have been black people on the Jetsons. If they'd been born 20 years before, not only the Jetsons would not exist, like the whole concept of the Jetsons would have been like ridiculously outrageous. And it would have had English people in it, probably, not Americans.
There you go.
Anyway, it's a theory I've got.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other, I guess, concept of time travel that comes to my mind is, I've been since becoming Catholic, the Christian theology has clarified magnificently for me. So it's really, really interesting when Christians say, "Oh, God is eternal, exists out of time.
Mm-hmm.
God exists
Yes.
out of time."
Out of time.
And so that's where my brain goes for time travel now. It's like, no, we just have to figure out how to get out of the timeline and then be like, boop, we're going to re-enter it over here. And then we have to get back out. And then we can re-enter it over here. But then when you think about it that way, I'd be like, I probably not. We probably won't be able to figure that out. God might just be like, no, that would be a bad idea. I'm just gonna quash that right now.
Gonna ixnay that now. Right now. There are upper limits to reality. There is a ceiling to this game. We saw this at the Tower of Babel. There's a ceiling to this game, and it's the tower when you touch God.
Right.
And God doesn't really want anybody, to paraphrase from the old song, knocking on heaven's door before he decides you're going to come knocking on heaven's door.
Right.
And the other thing that really should break your brain, Catholicism, Christianity, whatever you want to call it, is yes, Jesus out of time, for sure. That breaks your brain. But here's the other thing that really breaks your noodle. Jesus, or not Jesus, but God goes, okay, I'm going to insert myself into the time stream here in the form of a man, which is just the beginning of the outrageous things that Christians believe.
Right.
It's just the beginning. That's the tip of the iceberg. That's mildly, moderately. That's whatever. We can deal with that. Let me really break your brain. That then the Son of God goes, oh, you know what? I'm going to die, and then in 3 days I'm going to be resurrected. You have a good day. And by the way, all you have to do is believe in that, and guess what? You will be saved. And all of humanity goes, excuse me, what? And this is why I have said for a long time in my own life, on my own journey, interestingly enough, I was raised Catholic and then walked out of that and walked into Protestant Christianity for a whole variety of reasons, which are way beyond the pale of this show, but walked into that and am now walking through that entire process of belief. And, you know, I've said since the beginning, Christianity makes the most outrageous claims of any religion on the planet if you actually look at its claims. And that's why it has to be true. It has to be, because the claims are outrageous and they require outrageous evidence. And we have outrageous evidence, and it's just you don't want to believe it. Well, that's okay. It's true. It doesn't require you to believe it. It's like gravity. Gravity doesn't require you to believe in it. It's just true. Right. Yeah. It just works, you know. So go right on ahead. Don't believe in gravity. Jump out the window. See how it works. I don't know. Go ahead. Fine. Got to build a really expensive rocket to defeat gravity.
There you go. Yep.
There's a guy around the corner from where I live.
Yeah.
Named Elon. He can tell you all about that.
There you
go. Yeah. Okay. You sort of wandered around the block on all this.
Yeah.
So you have young kids. I have an 8-year-old. The folks that are in that 10 and under group, right? I think about this book, The Time Machine. When I think about how we talk about time travel, how we talk about memory and consciousness, how we talk about how we anchor those ideas, right? Utopia, dystopia, and the generation that is 10 and under that's being born right now and coming into the world, those people have zero psychic or psychological connection to the 20th century in the way that we do, beyond sort of the way we look at like sepia toned pictures of our great grandparents from the Old West, if we happen to have any.
Right.
Or like if your parents or your great grandparents or great great grandparents came over on an immigrant boat, you know, during the first immigrant waves in the early parts of the 21st or the 20th century, you know, those pictures of all those stiff people standing at Ellis Island, right? We have no connection to those people. And the people who are 10 and under, they will have zero connection to Vietnam or to Ronald Reagan.
I have little enough connection to Vietnam.
Well, okay. Let me
alarmingly.
Right. Alarmingly, right? Like, here's another one. They'll have little or no connection to September 11th or to COVID. Yep. It won't mean anything, right? And so I worry about this book, right? The Time Machine. Not because I think it will fall out of favor, but because I think that just like Martian Chronicles, it's one of those books that's so embedded that we don't think about it. And so eventually at a certain point, no one will read it anymore. Like 1895 is a long way away. If you were born in 2020, it's a long way away. That's a lot of water to like step back over to grab this book.
A long way away when you were born in 1990.
It is a long way when you're born in 1990.
Like, it's the type of book that they make you read in high school, and you're like, why do I have to read this?
Why do I have to read this? It goes on the pile with Jane Austen and Shakespeare. And you're like, there's got to be a better solution. Why do I need to know about Macbeth? Right. And so we don't live currently as Eloys, and we don't live currently as Morlocks. That didn't play out. Maybe metaphorically it has, but materially we don't live like that. And I was promised vacations to the moon and rockets to the Mars, and I was even promised time travel by all these books. And instead, I've been delivered 240 characters on Twitter rants, and TikTok nonsense. That's what I've been delivered. And by the way, Peter Thiel has brought this up too. He's also frustrated about it. So at least one of the rich guys is on my side. Like, he's frustrated by this too. So normally when we cover science fiction, normally when we talk about these things, you know, it goes into the speculative and it goes into the sort of, I don't know where things are going to go. But we've had some real insights in this series of podcasts that we've done this year. So I guess maybe my last question is for you is, what are you going to tell your kids about these books, and how are you going to introduce, because your kids are young, right? They're in that milieu. My kid is a little bit older, but still in that milieu. I'm currently reading Lord of the Rings to him, and he loves the hobbits. They're his spirit people. You know, he likes the idea of, but he also likes the idea of like eating like 8 times a day and stopping for a meal and like sitting by the side of like a ruined tower at Orthanc and having a cigar. Like, he loves all of that, you know? So how do we give these books? How do we give this book to our kids? How do we make it not be Jane Austen or William Shakespeare?
So this reminds me of, what was it? It was like a study. They were like, kids that grow up in households with books read more. And I was like, yeah, because the parents are reading. And so it's so interesting. Since my housemate has moved out, we don't really have the TV on.
Mm-hmm.
We don't turn the TV on. We have 2 toy boxes for my, and that I'm thinking is too much, for my 18-month-old. But one of them is full of books.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're just hanging out in the living room, mom sits there and reads.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's not too immersive, because I have to make sure the 18-month-old doesn't kill herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you know, mom's sitting there with a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I intend to, you know, make sure my kids are reading this stuff and learning and immersing themselves? I'm gonna read it myself. You lead by example. Keep yourself well read. Keep yourself reading. You know, one of my best friends who also has young kids, he's thinking the same thing. He's just made it his, and my best friends, like, we grew up playing video games, and I fully intend to have my kids playing video games within reason, because I think there's so much research on how many good things video games can teach you, again, in moderation. And I'm not talking about the dumb mobile games that are just trying to get your money. There's value even in something like Minecraft. But that's again beyond the pale of this show. But you know, my kids will grow up watching me read, and already my daughter, she's 18 months old, but she'll go over to pick up a book and she'll start reading it. She'll just flip the pages. If you want readers, be a reader. And then also, but don't flip your lid if your child, for whatever reason, because my brother doesn't like reading, and he's never been diagnosed with like dyslexia or anything, but you know, there are kids that are dyslexic. Like, audiobooks count. Audiobooks count.
With
exposure
that,
to the literature.
Exposure to literature. There you go. I couldn't have said it better myself. So with that, I'd like to thank Christen Horne for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, as always.
And with that, we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.